There's a moment, a single note that still echoes through the history of soul. A voice so raw it could make joy sound like pain, and pain sound like prayer. That voice belonged to Dennis Edwards, the man who saved the Temptations when they were falling apart, and then watched fame devour everything he loved. If you grew up with Papa Was a Rolling Stone, you know that voice deep, hungry, almost haunted. But what you might not know is the story of the man behind it. The man who started in a tiny Alabama church, raised by a preacher, dreaming of nothing more than a steady job in Detroit's factories until destiny called his name. Dennis Edwards wasn't supposed to be famous. He wasn't even supposed to sing secular music. His father preached against it. But when the world around him began to hum with rhythm and blues, and Motown was turning Detroit into a musical empire, the church boy couldn't stay away from the fire. He sang like a man who'd seen too much, like someone trying to baptize his own sins. And when Berry Gordy first heard him, he knew this wasn't just another singer. It was lightning. But lightning never lasts long. Behind the stage lights and silk suits, Dennis was a storm-proud, brilliant, reckless. He fought with his demons and his brothers in equal measure. He replaced the legend David Ruffin, the voice of My Girl. And for a moment, he became the heartbeat of the Temptations. Songs like Cloud 9, Ball of Confusion, Can't Get Next to You. They weren't just hits, they were anthems of a restless America, sung by a man who carried both heaven and hell in his throat. But the higher he flew, the darker it got. Drugs, jealousy, and betrayal began to circle around him. He found love in Aretha Franklin, the queen of soul herself, only to lose her to his own mistakes. He rose again as a solo artist with Don't Look Any Further, a song that would outlive him by decades, sampled by rappers who never knew his name. And when the applause faded, when the lights went out, what was left was a man alone fighting his own body, his own mind, and the silence that fame always leaves behind. In the end, the man who once electrified the world with his voice couldn't move his own limbs. They said it was meningitis. He said it was something darker. This is the story of Dennis Edwards. A man who could make a crowd of thousands rise to their feet but died, whispering for help that never came. A story of brilliance and betrayal, of music and madness, of a voice that refused to die, even when the man behind it could no longer sing. Long before the tuxedos, before the fame, before the heartbreak, there was a small red brick church in Fairfield, Alabama, where a little boy sang louder than anyone else in the room. His name was Dennis Edwards, born on the 3rd of February, 1943, the son of a preacher and a praying mother. In that church, music wasn't entertainment, it was salvation. It was the sound of pain turned into praise. And from the first time Dennis opened his mouth, people said his voice didn't belong to a child. It had too much weight, too much ache, like he was already carrying a lifetime of songs inside him. When Dennis was 10, his father moved the family north to Detroit, Michigan, chasing opportunity like thousands of other black families in the Great Migration. Detroit in the 1950 seconds was a city of smoke, steel, and rhythm. Men worked 12-hour shifts in the auto plants by day and spent their nights in the juke joints, the bars, the corners where the sound of soul was being born. Dennis was caught between both worlds. His father wanted him to stay in the church, maybe even follow the pulpit, but the boy had other plans. He loved Sam Cooke, the golden voice who made gospel sound like velvet and turned Sunday hymns into Saturday night hits. If Sam Cooke could cross over, maybe Dennis could too. Still, it was forbidden in the Edwards household to sing the devil's music. His father said those nightclub songs would lead a man straight to hell, but even hell sounded like a place worth visiting if it came with a mic and a spotlight. After high school, Dennis joined the army. He wore the uniform, did his duty, but the stage kept calling. When he came home, Detroit was different. It was on fire with music. Berry Gordy had built an empire called Motown, and its doors on West Grand Boulevard were turning regular kids into legends. Dennis started small, forming a local band called Dennis Edwards and the Fireballs. They played smoky bars, talent shows, anywhere that would have them. He sang like every night was his last, sweating, screaming, bending notes until the crowd felt the song in their bones. One night, fate walked in. A member of the Funk Brothers, Motown's legendary house band, was in the audience. He called Berry Gordy and said, "You need to hear this kid. He's got thunder in his throat." Berry Gordy listened, and he agreed. But Motown was a machine, and machines moved slow. Gordy put Dennis on a retainer contract, $250 a week, just to wait. He wasn't assigned to a group, wasn't given a song, just told to stand by. For 2 years, he waited. 2 years of sitting in the Motown hallways, watching Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson, Diana Ross walk by, stars glowing in real time, while he was just the man in the corner with a voice too powerful for its cage. Then one night, the phone rang. A singer from the Contours, one of Motown's touring acts, had fallen ill. They needed someone now. Dennis stepped in, and when he grabbed that mic, the crowd roared like they'd been waiting for him all along. That performance changed everything. The boy from the Alabama church was no longer a dreamer. He was a man standing at the door of destiny, and Motown was about to let him in. The call came like lightning in a quiet room. It was Motown, and they needed Dennis. One of the Contours' lead singers had fallen ill while touring as the opening act for the Temptations, and they needed a voice that could hold a crowd. Dennis showed up, grabbed the mic, and never looked back. From that night on, everyone at Motown knew this man wasn't just a replacement, he was the future. By 1968, the Temptations were crumbling. David Ruffin, the golden voice of My Girl, had become unpredictable, wrapped up in ego, fame, and cocaine. The group was losing patience and their rhythm. Behind closed doors, Ruffin told Dennis, "They're gonna replace me, man. You'd be perfect for the job." The next day, the phone rang again. The Temptations wanted Dennis Edwards. At first, he hesitated. He admired Ruffin, the very man he was asked to replace. But in Motown, hesitation meant extinction. He said yes. The first rehearsal felt electric. Otis Williams, Melvin Franklin, Eddie Kendricks, legends in motion, all turned when Dennis sang that first line. His voice was rougher, rawer, more urgent than Ruffin's. It wasn't polished Motown perfection, it was gospel and fire, Sunday morning colliding with Saturday night. When Cloud 9 dropped, the world stopped. That song wasn't just music, it was revolution. It spoke of struggle, escape, and pain. And it earned the Temptations their first Grammy Award, the first ever for Motown Records. Dennis Edwards had brought something new, social power. Songs like I Can't Get Next to You, Ball of Confusion, and Papa Was a Rolling Stone turned the group from love crooners into prophets of their generation. And it was his voice, that deep, shaking, thunderous voice, that carried them there. At concerts, he moved like a man possessed, sweat pouring, eyes blazing, hips jerking in rhythm with the horns. Women screamed his name, men watched in awe. He was the storm center of every stage. But behind the curtain, the same fire that made him unstoppable made him dangerous. He lived fast, talked loud, and partied harder than anyone else. And fame, the kind that comes fast, doesn't forgive excess. That's when Aretha Franklin entered the story. They met backstage at a Detroit benefit concert. Two church kids who had crossed the same forbidden line from gospel to soul and never looked back. They were drawn to each other like mirrors. Both powerful, both wounded. Aretha fell in love with him truly, deeply. Her 1972 classic Daydreaming was written about Dennis. She imagined a peaceful life with him, away from the chaos, the noise, the fame. But peace doesn't belong to men like Dennis Edwards. Rumors spread, the late-night disappearances, the whispered names of other women. And when Aretha found out about his affair with Ruth Pointer of the Pointer Sisters, her heart cracked quietly in half. They never spoke again. He'd lost her, the one person who saw the frightened boy behind the stage star. Still, Dennis kept performing. The Temptations became bigger than ever. But inside the glitter, cocaine crept in. The tension grew. Melvin Franklin and Otis Williams began to resent how the spotlight followed Dennis everywhere. They said he'd gone Hollywood. They said he was out of control. And maybe he was. Because by 1977, the same man who lifted the Temptations to new heights was told to leave. The voice that saved them had now become too loud, too wild, too real. The lights dimmed, and the applause faded, but Dennis Edwards was still on fire. Only now, that fire was eating him alive. By 1977, his run with the Temptations had made him a star. Hit records, sold-out tours, women, money, adoration. But inside, Dennis was restless, haunted by something he couldn't name. Every night after the shows, when the crowd went home, the silence pressed in. And silence has a way of turning into temptation. Cocaine had already started to weave its way into his world. Quiet at first, then louder. It made him feel unstoppable. It gave him the illusion that the music was still playing, even when the room went quiet. But that kind of high always comes with a low. He clashed with his bandmates, especially Otis Williams and Melvin Franklin, men who had once been brothers to him. They accused him of stealing the spotlight, of showing up late, of losing focus. Dennis accused them of jealousy. The brotherhood that had once built Cloud 9 now lived on separate planets. In the studio, he was still brilliant but unpredictable. Sometimes, he'd walk in sober and deliver magic in one take. Other times, he'd disappear for days, chasing the white line of escape. Motown was changing too. The sound of soul was being replaced by the glitter of disco and the polish of pop. Dennis wasn't a disco man. He was a preacher's son who sang like every note could save him from himself, and that kind of voice didn't fit in a world obsessed with shine. By 1980, he was out. Again, but life has a strange way of circling back. When Motown announced a reunion album with David Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks, Dennis was called home. 3 voices, 3 storms, on one stage. The reunion tour should have been redemption. Instead, it was chaos. David was deep in addiction, Eddie was sick, and Dennis was trying to keep it all together while fighting his own demons. Some nights, they couldn't even finish the set. Other nights, it was pure brilliance, flashes of the old magic. That golden Motown fire that once defined an era. But the tour fell apart as fast as it began. David disappeared. Eddie got tired. And Dennis once again found himself staring at a quiet phone. He tried to reinvent himself. In 1984, he released his solo hit, Don't Look Any Further. The song was slick, hypnotic, a mix of funk and prophecy. It climbed the R&B charts, hit number 2, and proved that Dennis Edwards wasn't done yet. It was his resurrection anthem. But even as that song played on radios across the world, the old habits whispered his name. The cocaine, the late nights, the paranoia, they never really left. He would win the fight for a while, then lose it again. And when Motown brought him back for another reunion in 1987, it ended the same way. Arguments, missed shows, broken trust. By 1988, he was fired for the 3rd and final time. The Temptations moved on, the industry moved on, and Dennis, the man who once carried Motown on his back, was left behind, carrying only his memories and a voice that no one could take from him. He used to tell people, "Music saved my life, but it also cost me everything." And as the 1990 seconds arrived, the man who once filled stadiums with sound began to live inside the quiet, where the echoes of his own songs followed him like ghosts. By the time the 2000s rolled in, Dennis Edwards had lived 3 lives: the preacher's son, the Motown star, and the survivor. But every note he ever sang carried the same undertone. A man still searching for peace. After decades of touring, he settled quietly in Street, Louis, living off performances with the Temptations review featuring Dennis Edwards, his own version of the group, formed after Motown's original lineup had fractured beyond repair. The shows were smaller now, casino lounges, state fairs, blues festivals. But when Dennis stepped to the mic, time still bent around him. He didn't just sing, "Papa was a Rolling Stone," he lived it. He was older, slower, but the fire in that voice never dimmed. Fans said he could still shake the room with a single growl, still make the crowd cry with that ache only gospel men know. On stage, he was immortal. Off stage, he was fragile. Years of living fast had caught up. The body that once danced across Motown stages now trembled under pain. In 2017, Dennis began to fall ill. The doctors said it was meningitis, an inflammation of the membranes around his brain and spinal cord. It left him weak, nearly paralyzed, and confined to a bed. For the first time, the man who could never stop moving couldn't move at all. The stage was gone. The spotlight dimmed. All that remained was the sound of machines humming in the dark. His wife, Brenda Edwards, moved him from their home in Street Louis to a luxury apartment in Chicago, hoping better care would help him heal. But in that quiet high-rise, shadows began to grow. An anonymous call reached the Illinois Department on Aging, a voice claiming Dennis Edwards was being abused. When investigators arrived, they found Dennis in his bed, frail but lucid enough to speak. He told them his wife had been trying to suffocate him, pressing his face into a pillow, taking away his hearing aids so he couldn't call for help. The caseworker was shaken. Police were called. An emergency protection order was filed against Brenda Edwards, claiming she was a threat to her husband's safety. She denied everything. Through tears, she told reporters, "I love Dennis. I would never hurt him. We were married for 18 years. His daughter, however, believed the worst. She said her father's last words to her were filled with fear, whispers of betrayal, confusion, and pain. The hearing was scheduled for the 2nd of February 2018, but Dennis never made it. He died one day before the court date on the 1st of February 2018, just 2 days shy of his 75th birthday. The official cause: complications from meningitis. The Cook County Medical Examiner's Office found no signs of external abuse, but rumors never stopped. Fans, family, even Motown veterans debated behind closed doors. Was it illness, or something darker that silence could hide? The truth, maybe, lies somewhere between the two, like the blurred line between gospel and soul, love and obsession, devotion and control. When the funeral came, the church was packed with Motown ghosts, men and women who had built an era. His voice filled the room one last time through the speakers. Papa was a Rolling Stone. And for a moment, every tear, every scar, every rumor fell away, leaving only the sound of a man who gave everything he had to the music. He was 74 years old, and even in death, Dennis Edwards still sang. In the end, when the lights of Motown faded and the smoke cleared from decades of fame, there stood one voice, deep, trembling, powerful, that refused to die. That voice belonged to Dennis Edwards. He came from the church pews of Alabama, raised on gospel, shaped by Detroit's steel and struggle. He never chased perfection, he chased feeling. Every note he sang came from somewhere real, somewhere between love and pain, faith and fury. When he joined the Temptations, the world was already changing. The 1,960 seconds dream of romance was cracking under the weight of war, drugs, and revolution. Dennis didn't sing about roses or candlelight, he sang about reality. When he shouted, "Ball of confusion," that's what the world is today. You could feel a preacher's sermon hiding inside the rhythm. He gave the Temptations a new soul, rougher, bolder, unapologetically human. And when he sang "Papa Was a Rolling Stone," it wasn't just another hit, it was prophecy. That song, with its haunting bass line and gospel tension, became a hymn for the broken families, the lost fathers, the dreamers trying to make sense of America. For many, it was the soundtrack of survival. Dennis Edwards didn't just inherit Motown, he reinvented it. He carried the label into a new era, proving that soul could be political, spiritual, and dangerous all at once. He made the microphone a pulpit and the stage his church. Yet, like so many sons of gospel, the demons he sang about were the ones he carried inside. He loved too hard, fought too often, trusted the wrong people, and ran from the silence he couldn't bear. But when he sang, all of that turned to gold. Even in his later years, after the drugs, after the breakups, after the fame had flickered out, people still came to see him. Because hearing Dennis live wasn't nostalgia, it was communion. He'd close his eyes, let that gravelly roar rise from his chest, and for a moment, You remembered why soul music ever mattered. His death in 2018 broke hearts across the music world. To some, it felt like the last echo of the true Motown era had finally gone silent. But if you walk into a club, a wedding, or an old jukebox bar and hear that opening line, "Papa was a Rolling Stone," you realize he never really left. Every sample, every cover, every artist who learned to sing like they were testifying, from The Weeknd to Anderson, Pac, from Beyoncé to John Legend, they're all carrying a piece of Dennis Edwards. His sound became the bridge between gospel's cry and R&B's confession. And maybe that's the real legacy, not the scandals, not the Grammy trophies, not even the hits. It's that voice, that unbreakable, untamed, undeniable voice. Because long after the crowd stopped screaming and the headlines stopped printing, Dennis Edwards is still out there in the grooves of vinyl, in the pulse of every soul record, in the heartbeat of a music that refuses to die. He once said in an interview, quietly, almost like a prayer, "The Lord gave me a gift, but He never said it'd be easy. I just hope when I'm gone, they remember I sang the truth." We remember, Dennis, every note, every cry, every truth. Rest easy, brother. You've earned your peace. And somewhere, in that great Motown choir in the sky alongside David Ruffin, Eddie Kendricks, Melvin Franklin, that thunderous voice rises again. Heaven's got harmony tonight. Rest in power, Dennis Edwards, the voice that would never die.